Welcome to Season Liberally. My name is Cecil. Today we're going to be making pork carnitas. And this is an interesting twist on a carnitas recipe. It's a little more like a confit than a traditional carnitas. Really wonderful recipe. We're also going to be making a quick pickle out of some cabbage and some jalapeno and some red onion. It's delicious, wonderful football food for the big game that's coming up in a week. So I hope you stick around. So we're going to get started, and we need to cut the pork, get our aromatics ready, and grind our spices. So that's what we're going to do. First thing we're going to do is we're going to wind up cutting our pork. So lots of times if you can go to the butcher and you can get a Boston butt, a boneless Boston butt, that is a great cut of meat to use in this, and that's what I have. Now the difficulty is when you go to the butcher, sometimes the butcher will have cut off a good deal of the fat. This normally comes as a very fatty cut. There's normally a big chunk of fat on the top. And they'll remove this fat and use it in sausage and ground pork and other things. So you normally, and most people don't want to go into a butcher and get a giant fatty cut of meat. So the butcher will automatically remove it, especially if you go to a supermarket butcher. Chances are they would have already removed this fat. And that's the case with where I bought it. They removed most of the fat. This would normally be about a full inch thick worth of fat. And that's the type of cut you need. So in order to supplement this and to use the proper amount of fat for this recipe, I bought a piece of pork belly to go with it. Now, do you see how thick this is here? That thickness of the fat is what we want. And there's not a ton of meat on a pork belly, and this is going to cook for a nice long time. So I don't mind so much that this is two different cuts of meat. It'll wind up tasting the same at the end, and I really do need this fat for this recipe. So I'm going to cut this into chunks now. You want bigger chunks for this. You don't need small chunks. You want nice big size pieces, and this size piece is about right. It's about a 2x2 chunk. And that's what I want. I'm going to cut this one in half, and this is going to be perfect size. And I'm going to cut this a little smaller because there's bigger chunks of fat on this. So this recipe calls for 1 large onion. I don't have a large onion. Instead, I have 2 smaller onions. But you definitely want 1 nice-sized yellow onion for this. And if you don't, like I say, you can use 2 of these smaller ones. So now for these onions, I'm actually going to be slicing them. So instead of normally keeping the root end on, I don't need to do that today. I'm going to cut both ends off, the root and the top of the onion, and I'm going to just peel this layer, this onion skin layer off, because I want to slice these. So I'm going to slice these nice and thin. You can put these in a mandolin if you want, or you can just slice them like I am. Now for this garlic, I'm not going to do much except for smash it. I'm going to take the paper off of each one of these. So for these, what I want to do is I want to just take them, and if they're nice and large, like this chunky one, I'm just going to squash it. So now we got to get our spices ready. There's a lot of spices in this. I have an old coffee grinder that I use for grinding spices. Sometimes I grind sweet spices in here. Sometimes I grind savory spices in here. And I like to make sure before I use it that I clean it out a little. The best way to clean this particular model out is to use a little bit of rice inside of here. Whirl it around in there, and it will pull any of the spices that are inside, still stuck inside of here, out with the rice. So that's what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to pour some rice in here. I'm going to put the top back on, and then I'm just going to run it a little bit and then dump the contents. This helps get all those little nooks and crannies that are in there full of different kinds of spices, it helps clean it out. And I do this periodically, especially if I just did some sweet spices. So if I just did cloves or nutmeg or anything like that, cinnamon, if I put a cinnamon stick here and ground it, I want to make sure that I clean it out if I'm going to put now cumin and coriander in here. So now you saw it a few seconds ago, it was full of different kinds of spices. Now there's nothing in here and it's completely clean. So here's what I want to do. I have in here coriander, cumin, and black pepper. So it's about a teaspoon of black pepper, 2 tablespoons of coriander, and 2 tablespoons of cumin. And I'm just going to put them directly in here. And then I'm going to grind it because I want to make sure that each one of these spices is nice and ground. And I don't like to keep these types of spices in my house pre-ground. Because if I pre-grind them, they're going to lose a lot of their flavor. And there's a lot of flavor in each one of these spices. And I want to make sure that it's as full as possible. So there we go, a nice, it's all completely ground up. All right, now it's ready to assemble and put in the oven. You're gonna need a big, heavy Dutch oven for this. You can use, if you want, a pan, one of your pots, especially if it's a pasta pot or something like that. You just gotta make sure that the lid is nice and tight on it. Now, this one has a nice, big, heavy lid, and this is perfect for this type of work. So what I'm doing is I'm adding about half of it, mostly the fatty pieces at the bottom. I still have a lot of the lean pieces out here, and I'm actually going to add all of my aromatics in the middle. So all of those are placed in the middle, and now I'm going to start adding my spices. Like I said earlier, the ground coriander, cumin, and black pepper, and that's just going to go on top here. I'm going to do the same now. I'm adding Aleppo pepper, 1 teaspoon of Aleppo pepper, but you can add as much heat as you like, and you can also use red chili flakes. ½ teaspoon of thyme, and 2 teaspoons of oregano. So now before I add this other stuff in, I am going to give this a little bit of a toss, just to toss it together. I'm going to add the rest of these in. I'm going to toss it again with all the rest of this, trying to coat it all. And now I'm going to add my oil. This is a cup of neutral oil. You could use grapeseed oil. You could use peanut oil. That's what I'm using. And again, I'm just going to toss this just a little, just trying to make sure that all the pieces in here are nice and coated. Before this goes in the oven, I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this. Now I will salt the final dish when it comes out and I do my taste, but I want to add a goodly sum of salt to this before it actually goes in. So before this goes into the oven, there's one more thing we have to do. We have to add 1 cup of water. And I'm just going to pour this over the top here. And then I'm going to put the lid on and put it directly into a 300-degree conventional 350 convection oven for 3 hours. When this comes out, it is going to be really rich, very fatty. It's going to have a really very deep, rich flavor. And it's going to need something to cut that fat flavor, that richness. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a quick pickle to go along with it. This is going to sit for the same amount of time that the pork cooks for. So really simple, we're going to take 2 jalapenos. So I'm going to take these 2 jalapenos, I'm going to have them and seed them. Now if you want this to be much hotter, you can of course leave the seeds in. Now I am just going to cut these in little slices. I'm going to take 2 large red onions And I'm going to cut them very similar to how I cut the onions for the carnitas. I'm going to cut off both the root and the stem. I'm going to pull the paper off. Now I'm just going to slice them into thin slices. If you think it's easier to use a mandolin, I'd go for it. There's no reason that you shouldn't use the tool that you think is the easiest to use. All right, so lastly I have this head of cabbage, and I'm going to try to slice this nice and thin. Now, when you get a head of cabbage, you want to cut the core out of the cabbage. As you can see, that's what I just did there. It mostly cut out on that piece, but there is a tiny piece here that I want to cut out. The core is kind of inedible, and it's really chewy, so I would just cut it out. And again, I'm going to slice this nice and thin. Now you can have this, right? 1 onion, 1 jalapeno, 1/2 of a head of cabbage. However, I like having this around just during the week. I think it's a wonderful thing to have just on hand. So I make a bunch of it so I could put it on other things. But if you wanted to just have this, it's perfectly fine. So this needs to get tossed a little bit so we can see what's in here. We are going to add to this. Now you can add a full 2 teaspoons of sugar if you like. I only like to add a couple of pinches of sugar, but this can be as sweet as you like. If you like sweeter pickles, you can certainly add more sugar. I'm only going to add a couple of pinches to this because I actually really like the sourness of the vinegar. And I'm also going to add a goodly amount of salt here. So salt to your tastes, but I'm going to be adding quite a bit of salt to this. So now I have 2 full cups of vinegar here. You're going to use 1 cup if you have this recipe. I'm just going to pour this. This is just straight white vinegar. It's actually going to color. The onion is actually going to color it sort of a pink when it's done. So I wouldn't use a different color. Use a clear vinegar if you can, and straight distilled vinegar is perfect. So use my hands to toss it a little. I just want to make sure it's all coated. And then I am going to put it in its container so it can sit in the fridge for several hours. All right, we have our pickle mixture and it's ready to go in the fridge and wait for our carnitas to finish. All right, it's been 3 hours and our pork is looking great in here, but we need to do one more thing. We have to cook it for another 30 minutes. What we're going to do is we're going to stir it just to sort of move it around a little. And when we put it back in, we're going to leave it uncovered. Now what this is going to do is it's going to crisp up some of this pork that's in here. And it's also going to evaporate some of this water. So I'm going to put it in the oven here. I have a 300-degree convection, 325-degree conventional oven. I'm going to put it in there for a half an hour, and then we have one more step to do. So pork just came out. It is nice and brown on the top. You can see these nice little brown bits. I'm going to start separating all this meat from the fat. The fat is going to go into this bowl with any of the other pieces in here. I'm going to wind up straining this in a second. And then I'm going to try to get some of the liquid fat into this other bowl by using a ladle. So I'm going to get started pulling some of this pork out. And as you can see, this is so tender, it's literally by its own weight, it's falling apart. And I'm looking for any large chunks of fat like this. I don't want this in my carnitas when I go to take a bite in it. So I'm going to pull that big chunk out and try to make sure that that fat doesn't wind up in my the taco that I create later. So this is all fat. Anything that's all fat just goes right into the refuse bowl. And there's going to be a few big chunks in there because I used that pork belly. And that pork belly is really almost all fat, and it's just going to be really an unedible kind of gross fat at this point. It did all that it was supposed to do. And what it was supposed to do was make sure that this was covered with a beautiful fat while it cooked. And we pretty much only have vegetable matter and a few little strands of pork left in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to lean this over a little bit to the side. And we are going to defat this as much as we can with this ladle. So in order to do that, you could see this. If you look here, you could see all this fat on the side, right? All I have to do is dip my ladle into that. And that is 100% pure fat. There's no actual cooking liquid in that. That's all fat. Now we are going to save some of this because we want to actually fry this carnitas in this fat. Now, not all this fat, but some of this fat. And we're going to do that in a few minutes. And that's going to give it that crispiness that you would normally have in carnitas. Well, there is an awful lot of fat in here, as you can see. And so we are being very careful to try to only pull fat out and leave the cooking liquid inside. This is all vegetable matter and a few strands of the pork. And what we're going to do is we're going to heat this up because we want to use some of this liquid. We're going to bring this up to a boil now. As this comes to a boil, we're just going to try to reduce this down by just a little bit. So inside of here, we have all those garlic cloves and that onion. And we want to keep all that in here and just reduce this liquid until it starts getting nice and thick. We're basically just we're just basically evaporating all of the water that was in here. And it only takes a couple of minutes on high to burn this all off, to evaporate all this water off. So once it starts looking like a sauce, they call that nappe consistency, coats the back of a spoon, it's done. You're going to want to take your pork and you're going to want to put it back inside. And while it's still on, I'm going to give it a toss. Move it around, and it's done. All right, we got a ripping hot pan here. Key here is it's got to be nice and hot. We got to make sure that we get this oil up to almost to its smoke point. Do you see immediately as I put it in how it's starting to smoke? That's exactly what you want. You're going to want to coat the bottom of your pan with that oil, and then you're going to want to just start putting in your pork. And you can see that it has got some nice crispiness to it on the bottom, and that's exactly what we want. Be real careful, you don't want to burn this, okay? but only cook it for like maybe 2 to 4 minutes. Moment of truth. I'm going to take a couple of these nice crispy bits of pork. To that, we're going to add some of our quick pickle, okay? I got this onion, this red onion, this cabbage, and this jalapeno. Now the red onion, and I know there's some people out there that might not like raw onions, but the red onion, when you marinate it like this in this vinegar, it really takes all the edge off of it, and it's wonderful. Feel free to add whatever you want to this that's going to be able to hold up to the vinegar too. If you want to add some carrots to that or some radishes, things, make it interesting. Don't put in anything that's going to really disintegrate though, because if you put something in here for 3 hours in the vinegar, there's some vegetables that won't hold up very well. So just be careful. Pick a hearty vegetable and it should be fine. Now, I add to this a few leaves of cilantro as well. You can mince this if you like, but I actually like the full leaf on there. So here we go. Let's give it a shot. It's not a taco unless it's falling all over the place. So here we go. Okay, I'm not talking to you until I hit this one more time. This is just such a wonderful, rich recipe, and the flavors are perfectly balanced. You have that meatiness and that beautiful richness that comes with the carnitas. It's been cooking for so long, it's soft, it's moist. Throw into that the salty, sour sweetness of the pickle, and then the herbal notes of the cilantro. It is a perfect dish. This is such a great way to eat pork and to have carnitas. I really, really hope that you try this. Remember to like and subscribe below. Be sure to hit that little bell, because I don't upload on a regular schedule. This is sort of a side project for me, so sometimes I don't upload for a couple of weeks. This will allow you to get the video in your subscription feed, and it'll let you know when I upload.